Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss a year of film history. Every episode, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema. This week we are on our 40th episode, which is 1930.
Is it our 40th episode?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because we got a couple bonus ones in there, so I wasn't sure what
That's
the number
counting the
was
bonus episodes and the
Okay,
wrap-up
cool.
episodes. So we're on episode 40 right now. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me, as always, is...
I am Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker.
And we are podcasters who have painstakingly gone through every single year in film history up to 1930, and we're gonna work on this next year for you. If you are listening to this on your podcast app, you can watch it on YouTube if you like. There is a we show we've got some little bonus information on the YouTube upload, but now that all this stuff is public domain, or not public domain anymore, and the rights holders have been a little mean to us as far as fair use and all that, which this should be. But anyway, we don't really have film clips anymore on YouTube. If you'd like to see clips, you can watch some of our older episodes that are public domain. But if you don't want to watch, you can listen on your podcast app of choice. Just search us up there. And yeah, follow us on Instagram, all that kind of stuff. And let's get started with the show. Okay. Glenn, how's it going? What's going on?
Not much. Still unemployed, but it's been nicer in New York City. I went to the park this past week. And
you mean Central Park?
I did go to Central Park, yeah, because I was uptown for once. I'm not usually around there, but it was a nice day, so I went to Central Park. And not once, I passed not one, but two groups of people that were playing the Alicia Keys New York song, just blasting it. And so it was very, cliche, Sunday afternoon in New York.
Were they tourists, or were they,
I don't know. It was just people were just loving being in New York that day, which, is a good feeling.
I'm in Denver. Different city.
How's that?
That's okay.
No one playing the Alicia Keys Denver song?
No, they're all playing the John Denver song about West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Which is still a Denver song somehow. No, that's a lie. I don't know. I've got I forgot if I mentioned this recently, but I've got my I Think You Should Leave themed party coming up. And
I'm so annoyed with myself that I probably can't go.
Hot dogs, sloppy steaks. We're also gearing up for the Denver Silent Film Festival, which is going to be in about a month. Yeah. But that's happening now. What was happening in 1930? Glenn, would you like to give us a little extra context for what was happening in 1930?
Sure thing.
The news of the year, 1930. The Indian National Congress declares its independence from the British Empire. The existence of the celestial body Pluto is confirmed. Mahatma Gandhi sets off on a 200-mile march towards the sea with 78 followers to protest against the British monopoly on salt. Amy Johnson becomes the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia. The Shadow debuts on the radio, striking fear into the hearts of listeners across the United States. The Vietnamese Communist Party is formed. The motion picture production code set forth by Will Hayes is adopted in Hollywood, but only loosely enforced.
And that last one is relevant, I think, to the movies we watched.
That's right. We're in the pre-code era, baby.
Yeah, which I had a passing understanding of, but I have only recently kind of fully understood what the pre-code era is, which is... Well, it's sort of loose, right? Like what the start and end of it are. It's generally considered 1927 and 1934, which is sort of the period of time between the introduction of sync sound, feature films with sync sound, and the formal enforcement of the Hays Code, which didn't really happen until 1934. And so there's this pretty brief
1934 in particular.
Yeah. Brief kind of period in Hollywood where the Hays Code existed, but no one really cared about it. And so the movies are a little bit racier, a little bit more violent. There's more cussing in them.
Mm-hmm.
They're still very tame by modern standards, but it's like, I don't know, it's kind of cool to see just like a little bit old movies that are a little bit more relaxed with their self-censorship.
Yeah, and these next 4 years of movies, they will be potentially the raciest Hollywood movies that we're going to be getting for the next 30 years, pretty much.
Yeah. Which, I mean, from what I've seen, it's like, it's not that much, but it's still more than, certainly more than like 40s or 50s movies tend to be. So,
I guess also people consider 1930 to be the beginning of the golden age of Hollywood.
Oh, well, that seems maybe a bit, that's even looser than pre-code, I feel like. Golden age. But yeah, I mean, this is
peak studio system during the sound era, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is sort of colloquially, I guess, what at least Americans consider the golden age, right? It's like, it's old-timey. They're making musicals and gangster pictures.
It's the classic stuff. It's the classic. Why don't we jump right from one segment into the next with 1 week, 1 reel? A couple movies that are actually 1 reel this time.
Yeah, right. Very true.
Maybe even half a reel, actually.
Yeah, they're pretty short.
We've got 2 Fleischer Brothers animated films this episode.
Which we haven't talked about any Fleischer Brothers stuff yet, right?
Oh, we definitely have.
Oh, we have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Out of the Inkwell, certainly.
Okay. Right.
God, there's been others. I think we talked about one recently, too. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're sort of the, I guess at this point, a rival to Disney's animation. Yeah, these 2 animated shorts, Dizzy Dishes and Swing You Sinners, both produced by Max Fleischer, but directed by Dave Fleischer, feel very kind of like quintessential, like 30s cartoon.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, in both good and bad. I mean, the only bad way I would say is that there's definitely some kind of
the racism.
Yeah, the racism, the caricature, and the yeah, that's creeping in there for sure. It's not maybe as in your face as maybe some other stuff, but they're occasionally just like, oh, yikes.
Yeah, specifically in these 2 with some just kind of random, like, Jewish stereotype kind of guys in them.
Yeah, but on both of these, I was just like, oh, yeah, that's there. There we go. But other than that, I think they're both pretty fun. Just in how silly and kind of, I don't know, they both have a lot of fun with cartoon logic, I guess. I think we talked about that a bit with like the early Disney stuff also. These feel like they're taking it a little further even.
Yes. I honestly I like what these are doing more than what Disney's doing right now. I think like the Fleischer brothers, as you were saying, really define that 1930s cartoon style, and Disney has always been in Fleischer's shadow up till now, and only really appear recently. These movies, they feel like kind of amped up, like let's take cartoons to their extremes right now. I think some of the cell animated stuff that we have been talking about in years past has been like cartoony and squashy and stretchy at moments, but like Swing You Sinners is just so much vibrant movement, off the wall cartooniness.
Yeah.
Unreal things happening, that like, you know, things stretching and transforming in cartoon logic ways.
Right. It's not even squash and stretch. It's like things like transforming and morphing into other things.
Yeah.
Just through, you know, cartooniness. Like anything can be anything else.
Yeah.
They both have a bit of a kind of like dream or nightmare logic to them, right? Where right, anything is anything. And so it is the speed at which like characters or objects will just become other things is very is palpable.
It's all very like let's throw any idea that we've got out there, and then like make it zany looking. I mean, it's almost like the kind of early slapstick shorts where they have a premise and then they're like, let's get everything that we can out of this premise. But these get to be a lot more visually inventive because they're not based in the real world, which is good because movies, due to the restrictions of sound, are getting less visually inventive. So cartoons can pick up the slack. Yeah.
Although these cartoons have sound because they are, as stated in the opening credits of each, talk cartoons. Talk cartoons.
Talk cartoons.
Talk cartoons.
I hardly know her tunes.
And they're both musicals, I guess, kind of, or they're both very musically based.
They include music. I mean, so Swing You Sinners is about Bimbo, which is the Fleischer Brothers cartoon dog mascot, who probably Mickey Mouse was sort of made in the image of in certain ways. He is trying to steal a chicken. He gets caught by a cop. He runs into a graveyard, and then a bunch of ghouls and spirits chastise him for being a sinner and stealing chicken, and they do that in song. And then they do a bunch of creepy stuff to scare the daylights out of him.
Yeah, there's a lot of dancing gravestones and butt slapping ghosts, all kinds of fun stuff.
It feels like an evolution of skeleton dance, but like way more involved.
Yeah. I do think comparing it to skeleton dance or like the early Mickey Mouse stuff, I do feel like the animation in these feels a little looser and kind of less mechanical than those.
It's got more energy.
Yeah. They both feel like you can kind of see the limits of the early animation in terms of like, you can kind of see where the walls are almost, even if they are very off. Both these are very off the wall and very like, don't really feel like they've been restricted in any sense in terms of what they can put on screen. There's a little bit of like rough edges on some of the animation just because of how early it is, I think.
There's rough edges, but also like it is doing stuff that is kind of more involved than a lot of current day animation does.
Yeah.
You know, I think that animation nowadays, they found ways to economize on things in a way that might not be like visually obvious all of the time. But it comes at the cost of this rubber hose animation is what they call it, like the rubber hose arms and legs that these characters have, because it's just animation is not really this expressive anymore. For the most part. So cheap in some ways, but very expensive in other ways.
Right. Yeah.
It's a catchy tune. It's
true.
It's always a vibe having ghosts sing about your demise to you, you know.
Which even the premise feels like such a like 1930s cartoon premise of go to a graveyard and have ghosts sing at you about how bad you are for stealing a chicken.
The other short, Dizzy Dishes, like it structurally feels a lot more like an early Chaplin or Keaton short.
Yeah.
It's like a guy's a waiter. Hijinks.
Yeah. Hijinks happen. But yeah, every character in this one is an anthropomorphic animal, including the first appearance of Betty Boop, who in her first appearance is a dog.
She looks like more like a human than a lot of the other characters, but she's got these long dog ears, which you could almost see as if she had like gauges in her ears and took them out and they're just dangling there.
She got floppy dog ears, but otherwise it's fairly recognizable as Betty Boop.
Beatrice Boop, the beloved.
She got the same voice. She got the same catchphrase.
Yeah, she just kind of appears in there. It's mostly still about Bimbo the dog.
Yeah.
But
this has a bit more like dialogue than Swing You Sinners. And I feel like it feels like very like it's one of those things where a lot of things from 1930s are less kind of right. We have a picture in our heads like what do people talk like in the 1930s, and it's usually this very exaggerated, mid-Atlantic accent sort of thing. And I feel like the dialogue in Dizzy Dishes is exactly, because it's a cartoon already, is exactly what it's like, the cartoon voice of people in the 1930s, how they spoke. It's very like, meh, 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 meh. You know, it's just this like nasal kind of loud way of talking.
Yeah, very, very kind of see kind of stuff.
Yeah. Which I think we're going to be getting into some of the actors that actually popularized that, where that voice comes from pretty soon. Which will be fun to talk about.
I'm looking at my Ultimate Gangsters Collection Blu-ray right
there
past
you go.
the camera.
Yeah, Daisy Dishes is kind of insane. There's a lot of very weird jokes in it. There's a big mean dog. I think he's a dog, like a bulldog, who's very hungry and wants a roast duck. But because Bimbo's taking too long in the kitchen, he decides to make a sandwich out of the dishes on the table and eat that. And then proceeds to eat the table.
He first eats the leg of the table.
He's the leg of the table, which has a bone in it. Like he breaks,
which is like perfect cartoon logic.
Right, he breaks the leg off the table and takes a big bite out of it, like it's a turkey leg. But then there's a bone in it, which
and then he eats the bone.
Introduces a whole concept of why are there bones in the table. Terrifying. That was, I think, the thing I laughed at the most, was just this guy eating everything around him, and it's almost like, just through his interacting with it, it kind of becomes food.
Yeah. And the whole time he's just like, "Where's my roast duck?"
Yeah.
And all the while Bimbo is getting distracted by various things. He is preparing the roast duck by pretending it's a barber situation and covering it in shaving cream and all
At
this.
one point, he like chops up a bunch of things with knives that then somehow turn into a train that he like rides away on.
I feel like that was kind of an interesting joke, because like, you know, the chopping becomes so fast and so rhythmic that it sounds like the chug 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 of a train, and then it just becomes a train. All of the stuff that he's chopping up.
Because I was like, oh, he's gonna make food out of this that he's chopping up. But then no, it becomes a train for his escape.
Yeah, and then he just bursts through the wall on his food train.
Yeah.
They're a lot of fun.
Yeah. Minus
Cartoons.
the caricature stuff, but
yeah. I guess the Fleischer brothers are Jewish, so does
that give them license to have
like... Maybe. I don't know.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's just an example of, right, we don't see animation like this very much anymore outside of Adventure Time or Cuphead. Thank you.
Cuphead, which is specifically referencing Fleischer Brothers animation.
Yeah. So it's like, it's cool to see this style, but it also comes with this thing of like, oh yeah, the 1930s were way more racist. Speaking of racism, let's talk about a movie that addresses that partially. Our first feature film of the episode. So play our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
And now we're here to talk about Borderline, a movie that I had never heard of before like a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, so I have a story about how I watched this movie. Should we start there? Yeah, you know the story already, but for the listener. So we were researching what movies to watch, and this movie came up. I was like, this seems like an interesting thing that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. And it's kind of a cool deep cut, maybe lesser known or sort of more kind of independently produced movie. And it does exist online to watch, but in researching it, we both found out that a 16mm print of this is owned by the New York Public Library.
Yeah, it just says that on the Wikipedia page for it. It's like,
right,
there's a 16mm print in the New York Public Library.
So since I live in New York, I was like, will they let me just watch that one? And it turns out, yes, they will, if you ask. Like, I somehow have gone this long without getting a library card at the New York Public Library.
Shame.
I had a Brooklyn Public Library card, but not a New York Public Library card. So I went to the the main branch, the Ghostbusters one, to get my library card, and it was very frustrating to have to wade through tourists. It's an amazing building, but it was annoying to have to wade through tourists. I was like, I'm here for library stuff. Excuse me. And then I found out that the print is not there. It's at the the Performing Arts Library in Lincoln Center, which makes sense. So I went up there, and the print actually hadn't shown up the day that I went, that like I set my appointment for. So I went back the next day, and the print had shown up. And yeah, I got a little kind of like private screening, a little room they have there, like just like a library room, but they have a projector, they have a screen, they had a bunch of old editing machines also, which is pretty cool.
Wow. It was like a screening room that they used for this kind of thing?
I don't think it was built for that purpose. It was sort of more like a classroom or like a conference room sort of thing.
I see.
But yeah, they have a 60mm projector. I think the print that I watched was struck, I think, in the 80s after the movie was sort of rediscovered.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not an original print of it, since I think it was shot on 35mm, and it was naturally would have been shot on nitrate.
Yeah.
So I don't think they would have let me watch a nitrate print. But shout out to John at the New York Public Library for projecting it and talking to me about old film stuff.
Oh.
And yeah, I thought this was a cool and unusual movie for when it came out.
I gotta say, I didn't watch it under such special circumstances, and when I started watching the movie, I was like, ugh. Ah.
I started watching it and I was immediately like leaning forward, like, all right, I'm gonna like watch this thing in a very academic way and like try to absorb as much of it as I can.
Yeah, if you have a projectionist who is projecting it just for you, it's not something that you can easily just tune out, you know?
Yeah. I had to score it myself. It's a silent print, so I had to just throw headphones on and listen to some contemporary classical music on Spotify just to give it some score.
Mm-hmm.
Which I found out is very different from the score that is on the version of it that's online.
I don't like that score. I think that's part of why I wasn't feeling the movie at the beginning.
I'm curious how much that would affect it, right? Because it's like neither of the scores that we watched it with, I think, are original to what, I don't think this movie has a canonical score to it. We should probably talk about what this movie is and what it's about and who made it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll just on the music really quick. Like the music on the Criterion release of this is some kind of like freeform jazz kind of stuff, and which I don't conceptually have a problem with, but I felt like it didn't really fit very well to the scenes that were happening in the movie. It felt like tonally it was very dissonant, and it was really like taking me out of the movie, and so the first like half of the movie I was like kind of hating it, and then I was like, all right, let me reset, reset my mind. I put on some different music that I just found off YouTube, and I was like, let me focus in again on what's happening, and I did appreciate it afterward.
So wait, what was the music that you found?
I just searched for mystery movie score.
Okay.
And then played whatever playlist came up on YouTube.
Yeah, because I listened to it with what's his name, Max Richter, I think is the composer, who has done I think a couple film scores, but is more of a kind of like contemporary classical composer. His one thing that he's most famous for is On the Nature of Daylight, which is in every movie, every TV show. If there's a sad scene, that piece plays. It's in so many things. It's very good, but it's also at the point now where if I hear it in something, I'm just like, oh, here we go. It was maybe a little bit dour for. I mean, the movie's not the most chipper movie in the world, but it maybe could have used something a little faster tempo. But anyway,
right. This movie is made in a fashion that is very inspired by Soviet montage. It's about something I think a little smaller scale than Battleship Potemkin.
Yeah,
but a little more emotionally driven. But it's applying a lot of the same sort of techniques. As far as like the quick cutting and showing parts of a scene to that are off the action to just kind of get a sense of what's going on, or like cutting to something that is sort of metaphorically resonant to what is happening in the main scene, and just having like a shot of something else. Yeah, I think that's part of what was sort of putting me off the movie a little bit, because I think that like when you combine it with this kind of like wordless emoting, it feels a little formless. But I think that some of it was quite well done, especially around the end of the movie.
Yeah. Well, I think especially early on, the movie doesn't give a lot of. It's not really prioritizing narrative clarity. Like
Yeah.
for the first half, I didn't really understand what was happening in terms of the plot or how the characters related to each other, or you kind of pick up things just by how how people are reacting to certain things. But it's like there's very few intertitles in this, and it starts kind of en media res. Like it doesn't really have like an introduction where you like meet all the characters and find out who they are. It sort of starts with like the plot already in motion, and it's really going for, I think, the kind of montagey editing, also just the writing and the performances are really going for sort of creating a feeling over narrative clarity, right? It's like a lot of the reasons for individual shots or individual edits are not to sort of like convey a specific piece of information, but more to kind of give an emotional feeling.
Yeah, it's vibes forward, which I think maybe stands in contrast to Eisenstein, at least what we've seen of him, because like Eisenstein is building a vibe, but every cut has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes this is doing some cutting that like I'm like, okay, but why did you do that though?
Yeah, there's a lot of like thematic intercutting, right? Where it'll cut from a person to just like wind blowing through some trees, or a kitty. There's some of it which is very abstract, right? And some of it which I think is like really, really great uses of like match cuts. There's a couple really, really good match cuts in this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
One with two knives that is like perfect. It is like a great example of what a match cut kind of should be.
Yeah, from a scene of somebody kind of goofing around with a knife, and then another scene where someone is kind of taking a bloody knife that they just killed someone with and throwing it in a bucket of water.
Yeah. It's so seamless, and it's like on the action so perfectly that for a split second you think that it's the same knife, and then you realize we've cut away to a different scene. Yeah. It's very good.
There's something happening on one side of a door, and someone's got their hand like on the door handle. And then you are cutting to the other side of the door to a hand that's on the other side of the door handle to transition from one side of the door to the other, scene-wise. Good stuff.
This movie was made in Switzerland, and it has a lot of, I think there's a lot of almost just like little kind of vignettes of like Swiss life, or kind of the landscape and the countryside of Switzerland, which, I don't know, I like landscapes. I appreciated that stuff.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me almost of, to make a comparison to like a contemporary or like a modern filmmaker, it has almost a sort of like Terrence Malick-y vibe.
I could see that. Yeah.
In terms of like focusing a lot on just like the natural world and sort of like how the characters are interacting with it, and also just drawing parallels between people's state of mind and sort of the landscape around them.
People's state of mind and the way that reeds move in the wind.
There were some reeds in this movie blowing in the wind, let me tell you. It's very cinematic. What can I say? Filmmakers love reeds, and you know what? Count me amongst them.
Filmmakers, not reed lovers.
Both, Give me a good give me a good Phragmites any day of the week.
Phragmites Joe Young. The perfect confluence of filmmaking and
it's about a gorilla that likes brushing his hand through reeds.
This movie is about racial prejudice and love quadrangles.
Yeah.
As
and
many
jealousy.
silent films are. Yeah.
And yeah.
There's a lot of there's just like a lot of like intrigue of like, I'm with this person, but I love this person, but that makes me jealous, so I'm going to confront this person about that. that's like the meat of the movie generally.
Yeah.
Then sprinkle in like how the two of the people involved are black in a white town, and that there are people who are not fans of them because they're racist.
Yeah. The movie makes that pretty explicit. There are some slurs thrown in there. So
Yeah.
if you wondered how racist the characters were, it's like, oh no, they know.
About half there are so few intertitles in this that about half of them have the N-word in them.
Right, it's like 2 out of 4.
Yeah.
Because I think if there's more than 4, it's not by that many. There might be like 6 or 7 total.
Yeah.
At the most. This movie was made by a group of artists in Europe called the Pool Group that were mostly poets. The director of this movie, Kenneth McPherson, and then there were 2 sort of authors / poets who had their sort of writing monikers were HD and Breyer, but they had full names that I did not write down.
Annie Winifred Ellerman and Hilda Doolittle.
Yeah, and they were the Pool Group, and they wrote intellectual essays and poetry and short stories. And Kenneth McPherson he was already a filmmaker when he made this movie, but this is his first and only feature film. This movie's about, I'd say, like a little over an hour. And I can kind of see, this movie does have a bit of a kind of like European, like early 20th century, like intellectualist vibe to it, I guess. In terms of, I guess it's an avant-garde movie, right? And it's like playing around with very, at the time, like kind of cutting edge editing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think this movie formally, in terms of like the form of it, like how it's shot and edited and made, is way more interesting than most of their stuff that we watched from this year. Like it's trying stuff, right? It's trying a lot of match cutting and a lot of fast edits and sort of like playing around with time and space in terms of the editing and how it's being shot, and like it's playing with really big ideas of like prejudice and sort of like interpersonal relationships and things like that. And it's doing it all without any hand holding. It's not trying to like set forth this like a clear sort of like narrative with it. It's like you said, very vibes forward. So I appreciated those things about it, that it was like, I don't know, it was trying stuff. And I don't know if I would necessarily call this an experimental movie. Maybe for the time it was.
It's using an uncommon style, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know if it necessarily did any like one thing that had not been done before, but it was doing stuff that was it was using uncommon filmmaking techniques for a unique narrative purpose, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I liked it.
Yeah. I didn't like the first half because I'm a Philistine, and I did like the second half because I was like, ooh, a moiter?
A moiter. Yeah, there's a moiter in this movie. I would like to see this movie again. I only watched it once for the show, but like even immediately after watching it, I'm like, I feel like I need to see this again. One, just because I didn't really follow the narrative very well the first time, and I think rewatching it with that in mind would be very helpful. There is I couldn't find it easily. There is a like, I don't know if it's an essay or if it's just sort of like there's sort of a written piece accompanying the movie that was written by HD about it that I couldn't find anywhere online, that I think is sort of meant to be a companion piece to it, as sort of like read this thing and then watch the movie, or vice versa. And I only watched the movie, so maybe there's a bit of what's the thing when like the Matrix video game ties into the movie, different media combining? Transmedia, panmedia,
multimedia.
I don't know, but there might be an element of that where it's like you're supposed to actually read this thing along with it, and I didn't do that.
Well, speaking of movies that don't make a lot of sense,
good segue.
Let's talk about why don't you pronounce this actually, Mr.
L'Âge d'Or?
L'Âge d'Or.
Or
Large Door.
Large Door, or The Golden Age, which is a rough English translation. Age of Gold, Golden Age, whatever. Which is the the follow-up to Un Chien Andalou by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali.
Yeah. And it very much feels in the same ilk, in the same realm. But they've expanded out their 17-minute short to a just over an hour long feature. And they're doing a similar kind of thing with this.
Yeah.
But they're giving a little more space to breathe, I suppose, and going into some new ideas instead of just violent horror.
It feels, I don't know, I think this is just as surreal probably as Un Chien Andalou, but it feels more pointed, kind of. Like, I think that movie was so sort of purposefully just sort of like, here's a bunch of weird stuff. Figure it, like, what does it mean? We don't know. Like, it's just weird stuff. Like, it means something. What does it mean to you? Like, what thoughts does this stir in you, audience member? Whereas this feels like there's more intent behind the imagery.
Yeah.
Where instead of just being like, what if ants came out of a hand? That's crazy, right? It's like, well, let's have a bunch of bishops sitting on the rocks by the ocean. And it's like, that feels more deliberate to me. It feels like they're making a point about, like, Catholicism or religion or something. I'm not sure exactly what point they're making. But
some religious stuff going on. I guess we should say also, Borderline was a silent film, and this is a talkie, unlike Un Chien Andalou, but it's like barely a talking film. There are maybe like 3 or 4 scenes that have dialogue, and the rest have kind of almost a movie tone-esque sync sound kind of situation.
It does kind of feel like, speaking of the sound in this movie, it does feel like a very early example of like creative sound design, which is something we haven't really seen in a lot of early talkies. Like, it's usually on-set sound or sound added in for specific sound effects of like, this person slamming a door, we're putting in a door slamming. Whereas this movie is a little bit more, because it's such a surrealist movie, there's a bit more sort of like creative, subjective sound design stuff going on. Or even things of like, there's someone walks into their bedroom and there's a cow there with a cowbell on, and the cow leaves the room. The cow leaves the room, so the cow is off screen, but we still hear the cowbell, like, echoing from the next room.
It kind of becomes, it starts as diegetic, and then it just becomes this like ringing echoing that goes on forever and fills all of the space, which is,
but it's like,
neat.
We haven't seen a lot of that yet. We haven't, like, now that sound is a thing in movies, it is nice to see someone actually trying to use it in an interesting way, as opposed to just, what would this thing sound like if we filmed it?
It's because this is so concerned with the kind of visual imagery, just kind of the what you get out of a certain visual image. They're using the sound occasionally to give you some sort of sonic imagery to layer on top of it. That cowbell like continues on over the next scene. And you're like, what's the juxtaposition here, you know?
Yeah, there's a bit with like lava bubbling, and they put the sound of a toilet flushing over it, which is great.
Was that lava? I thought it was like goopy brown mud. And
it might be mud.
That's funny, actually.
I thought it might be lava. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I know that
it's black and white, so it's hard to tell.
Psycho often gets the credit for the first toilet flush shown on screen, because it was considered, why would you? It's too inappropriate to show that. But this has a toilet flushing off screen, but while it is showing you just burbling gooey mud.
Yeah.
So
arguably,
maybe even more.
Yeah. Arguably more inappropriate.
Yeah. It's funny though.
I'm curious how true that is, because I wonder if that's in an American film or if that goes for any film.
Probably just an American film.
Yeah.
They're the ones that had all the strict censorship.
But maybe not, I don't know.
this movie starts with a mini documentary on scorpions.
Yeah, sort of 1930s
which...
Planet Earth, which is cool. Like, it's cool just to see old footage of scorpions.
Yeah, I actually couldn't tell whether it was stop motion or real.
They're real scorpions. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, I think it's just kind of funny to like, what can we do in our movie where we're throwing a bunch of weird stuff in? Let's start it with a documentary about scorpos, you know?
Yeah. Not a bad way to start a movie. I was immediately hooked. This movie feels very satirical, right? With all of the sort of surreal imagery in it. It feels very, if it's making any sort of point with it, it feels like it's very critical, I guess, of like aristocracy or the sort of bourgeoisie society of Europe at the time.
Yeah, there's a scene with like a dinner party with some rich people, and they're just sitting there in all their fancy garb, and there are like half a dozen flies on their faces.
Yeah.
I guess there's also like some kind of commentary on
horniness.
I don't know. Yes. Yeah. That's the word.
This might be the horniest movie we've watched for the show so far.
I don't know if the movie is though. I feel like it like, I don't know. It's got like a weird relationship with it.
The characters probably are, but yeah, the movie is almost. It's not necessarily judgmental against it, but it's almost like poking fun at them for how horny they are a little bit.
I don't know. There's like a guy who like he is just bumbling from thing to thing, not being able to, just losing track of himself over how horny he is.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple, right? There's a man and a woman who are both. It seems like all they want to do is make out on the ground in the dirt, and people keep like preventing them from doing so. People like the guards keep showing up and like pulling them away.
Yeah.
The guards of society, man.
Or the church.
Yeah.
But
all those bishops sitting by the ocean that turn into skeletons.
There's just so much imagery in this movie. Just shout out stuff. And it's like,
it's kind of hard to like summarize this because it doesn't really have a like, its plot is just a bunch of weird stuff happens. We could talk about some of the specific imagery in it. I think this movie reminded me of actually is like Monty Python sketches, just in terms of how quickly it will move from one thing to another and how like surreal it is.
Different.
Right.
Yeah.
But even some of the like humor of it feels almost a little similar. There's a bit right where early on when the guy is getting dragged away, there's a little dog, and he like takes the time to like break away from the people dragging him away to kick the dog. And it's like a little tiny dog. I hope this was done safely. It might not have been, but it is, for as cruel as it is, it's the timing of it is very funny. And they put in a little sound effect, which sounds like a person making the sound of just like as the dog like flies off screen. It feels like taking the dog from Anchorman. It's like such a ridiculous moment that I have no idea why it's there, but it made me chuckle. And I love dogs. I hate to see anything bad happen to one, but it was the comedic timing of it was good enough that it got me.
We'll just try and remain ignorant as to whether this was a cannibal Holocaust turtles situation.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it was made in Europe in 1930 makes me. He probably just kicked the dog. Like, I don't think that they were doing wire work at that point. There's a bit in sort of the first maybe third of this movie that made me think it's kind of a parody of like City Symphony movies. There's a bit that's like, the hustle and bustle of modern life in the city. And it's like, are they kind of making fun of like, Berlin Symphony of a Great City a little bit? Or just that kind of genre? Because that was like, right, that was a thing when this movie was getting made. So, oh yeah, after, so he kicks the dog early on. Later on, he does the same thing to a blind man. There's just a blind man walking down the street, and he like takes time away from whatever he was doing to go kick that guy.
Well, yeah, the guy he's trying to take a taxi. So this horny guy is getting we are introduced to him, I think, while he's getting like dragged away by some people, like seemingly being arrested or something.
Yeah.
He kicks the dog while he's being dragged away. He's able to escape from those people, and then he takes a taxi to a rich fancy person's party, but there's a blind guy that's standing in front of the taxi, so he just gets out and just kicks the blind guy onto the ground. And then gets in the taxi and drives away. It's very strange.
Yeah. And that's this whole movie, right? There's a whole sort of like little section while they're at the party where a guy shoots a child.
Yeah.
You know, there's the aforementioned horny stuff, like the man and the woman reunite, and they're in like the garden in like a hedge maze, and she like eats his fingers like off. Like there's a bit where like his hand is caressing her face, and she like puts the fingers in her mouth, and then we cut, and there's like an amputee, like a person without fingers has replaced the hand. Although later on he has fingers again, so it's, you know, it's not literal, I guess.
It's surreal.
As if anything in this movie is literal. None of it is.
Probably also later in that scene is the most famous thing from this movie, which is that woman is kind of very aggressively sucking on the toes of a marble statue.
Yeah, Tarantino loves this picture.
That scene was actually reproduced in the end of a David Bowie music video, where he does that right at the end of the video in a similar fashion.
David Bowie, big fan of Louis Buñuel movies.
This movie ends with like a bunch of kind of dignitaries, one of whom kind of looks like Jesus, who are walking into a castle to participate in an orgy. When they leave, like one of the women like tries to leave, and then the Jesus guy like kind of brings her back in and ostensibly murders her. And then he walks back out again, and the last scene of the movie is
when he walks out, his beard is gone though.
When he walks out, his beard is gone.
That means something. I just don't know what it is.
And then the last scene of the last image of the movie is a crucifix with like 8 women's scalps like hanging from it.
Yeah. That's like, there's clear things that this movie is about, and I think those are sort of like aristocracy, religion, and like sexual repression, and the interplay between all those things.
Yeah. What
specific points it's trying to make about those, I'm less clear on, just because of how surreal the movie is. But yeah, I feel like its broader sort of ideas are come across.
Yeah.
Through all of the weirdness, and you know, the weirdness is part of it.
I think I'm probably more of a fan of Un Chien Andalou. I think like its shorter running time and focus on just extreme violence makes it feel a little more punchy. Even though there's like more abstract imagery in this, but like you're more shocked by the abstract imagery in the other movie.
Nothing in this comes anywhere close to the razor blade through the eyeball. Like, I mean, that's one of the most like famous images in, you know, all of silent film, maybe all of film history. I don't know, but it's, you know, it's a very like visceral, shocking thing to see. Even if it's a goat eyeball, it's still just like it's it, you know, it gets you. And I feel like this movie, for all of its ambition, it never quite reaches that level of just like instilling a feeling in the audience quite to such a degree that does.
Another movie that deals with upper crust society, which I'm sure you loved.
Oh boy.
Is Animal Crackers.
Animal Crackers.
Which is more or less the same movie as the last Marx Brothers movie that we watched.
Yeah, pretty much. I wrote down almost a remake of The Coconuts. Like, in terms of its characters, its plot, it's remarkably similar. They were sort of like, let's do another one of these. Change nothing. Change like the bare basics of the premise, and the character names, and that's about it. You were correct. I did not enjoy this one. I was very excited, having never seen any Marx Brothers movies, to like, all right, we're gonna get to go watch Marx Brothers stuff. I'm sure that's gonna be great. And
Mhm.
I don't know. So far, it's like 0 for 2 with the Marx Brothers for me. I do
Maybe
not.
we should take a break until Duck Soup.
I think we should. Yes, I think until 33, we should take a break from the Marx Brothers, because I get what their shtick is, and I don't enjoy it.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, like, I enjoyed Coconuts. This is probably better than Coconuts. It's more
Marginally,
it's like less incompetently made.
it's
And
still
it's
kind of a mess though. Like there's still like
yeah.
there's we're talking about the sort of weirdo European avant-garde shit. This is a Hollywood movie, and there's just straight up bad edits in this, and like
Well,
bad.
it's a New York movie. It was filmed in New York or New Jersey.
I know,
or
but it's
something.
like it's not well made. Like it's the
No.
only real merits this movie has, I think, are its writing and its performances. Neither of which I particularly enjoyed anyway. But yeah.
So this is sort of another situation where the Marx Brothers are all kind of playing similar characters to who they were before.
Yeah.
Except in a different setting rather than in Florida. I don't know where this is supposed to be.
I think it's
This
Long
is
Island.
just Long Island, yeah.
It's at a fancy house in Long Island.
And Groucho Marx is an adventurer who has done some mildly racist things in Africa, and he's coming home to regale an upper crust party about his adventures in Africa, while at the same time there is being revealed a $100,000 painting that is the pride and joy of the owner of the house, and then there are some hijinks involved with crime related to the painting.
Yeah.
Like there were crime hijinks in the last
Much
one as well.
much like in the Coconuts, there are sort of like competing heist plans to steal or replace the painting. Like the Coconuts, this is also based on a stage musical that shared a lot of the same cast. I mean, Marx Brothers, and I think most of like the key cast members carried over from the stage version.
And we had a key cast member who carried over from Coconuts too, which is Margaret Dumont, who kind of plays the rich woman who is sort of the most immediate foil to Groucho's jokes, where she just kind of smiles and goes, "Oh, you know."
Right. To the point where there's there's one of them that is just, it's so absurd that like I couldn't deal with it.
What are you talking about?
There's a bit where a bunch of women show up, and Groucho, playing Captain Spaulding, which is a character name that has been reused in other things. It was in Devil's Rejects, and also there's a character in MASH named Captain Spaulding.
And it was initially named after a guy who was a real army captain who got busted for dealing cocaine to Hollywood people.
Didn't know that. There's a bit where a bunch of young ladies show up, and Captain Spaulding says, "I'm gonna sow a couple of wild oats," basically saying, "I'm gonna fuck all these ladies." And the old upper crust people are like, "Oh, isn't the captain amusing? He's so charming." And it's like, is he? I don't know. I don't see it that way.
Right.
Which I guess is the joke, but
this movie has some, kind of edgy references to sex, I guess. Some of which were cut out when it was re-released kind of deep into the code era.
Yeah, this movie it's very cheeky, right? It's very like, check this out, man. It's as is the Marx Brothers way.
Yeah, including Groucho talking to the camera as he might talk to the audience on the stage version.
Yeah, but it isn't even like, it's like that thing obviously works sometimes, right? Like, everyone loves Fleabag because it's great. And I know that it's almost like a joke now to have like characters talk to camera, because it's like it's a very common thing to do. And I think it's not the easiest thing in the world to pull off, but when it's done well, it really works, I think. I don't really think it's done well here. It feels like the sort of thing that would work on stage,
Yeah.
where he then just turns the audience. He's like, check this out.
I don't
But
think he does it quite as much in this one, but there is one part where, he's doing one of his million jokes that he does, and he's like, and he goes to the camera and he's like, they can't all be great, right?
right. And I was like, correct, sir. 1 out of 10 is not a great ratio. I think a lot of this probably worked better on stage than it does in the movie. It feels very stagey, right? Like,
For sure.
a lot of the
Yeah.
sets feel like stage sets. A lot of the blocking feels very theater inspired. It doesn't feel like a lot was done to sort of adapt this from the stage version so much as just sort of like, we're gonna film it with cameras and then
Yeah.
release it to people.
It's pretty restricted in terms of number of locations too. Like
Mhm.
they didn't do anything to make it, take advantage of it being a movie. It was probably just made pretty quickly
Yeah.
and cheaply.
The performances feel very stagey, which I think with sort of the more like the Marx Brothers themselves, I think kind of can get away with it because they're playing such big, broad comedic characters. But I feel like the supporting cast that are all ostensibly playing normal people, which is another thing in this movie where like everyone else in the movie is just acts like a person, and then the Marx Brothers characters just act like maniacs, and no one even seems to really acknowledge this.
They're just kind of annoyed at them.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it works. Like I don't maybe there's some disconnect between the stage version and the film version, and that's what is making this feel so stilted and not very funny to me. I might just not like the Marx Brothers shtick. I don't know, because
I know. Doesn't it feel a little blasphemous to say?
2 movies in, I'm like, I don't like these guys. I don't think they're funny. Like, there are jokes that work. Like, occasionally, I got a couple laughs out of this movie, but I could count on one hand the amount of times I actually laughed during this, almost 2-hour long motion picture. And a lot of those are like physical comedy gags, are things that would have worked in a silent movie.
I will say that Harpo's physical comedy is a little bit helped by his like horn honking, which you can't have in a silent movie. But that horn really that kind of adds a lot.
It's a very funny sound, so you throw that in front of anything and it helps. I think maybe the single funniest joke in this for me was towards the very end of the movie, all the silverware falling out of Harpo's coat that he's presumably been stealing over the course of the entire movie, and it's just like a steady stream of silverware just like falling out of his coat sleeve, and it goes on and on and on and on, and it's like, how, it's more silverware than anyone could ever fit in any garment of clothing. It's just like this absurd cartoonish amount of silverware falling out, and it's funny. It's, I think, similar. There was a similar joke, I think, in The Coconuts where like he runs off screen, he comes back with like way too many tools to try to break someone out of jail, and then he has the key anyway. So it's like there's some good like prop comedy that I enjoyed.
I mean, I like some of Groucho's like stupid lines, which
some of them work.
just...
I mean, a lot of them are like, they're kind of funny, but they're also just groan inducing, right? They're so like dad joke pun things.
We tried to remove the tusks, but they were embedded in so firmly we couldn't budge them. Of course, in Alabama, the Tuscaloosa, but that's entirely irrelevant to what I was talking about.
I mean, I wrote down a couple jokes that I enjoyed. There's another physical comedy thing is someone writes a check, and they drop it and it literally bounces off the floor.
Yeah, is the check good? And then he drops it on the ground.
And it bounces, literally. There's a bit where I think Harpo sits on someone's lap while they're playing bridge, and he says, "Oh, he thought it was contact bridge," which is
that was good.
That's a good joke. A couple Groucho bits. I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How I got in my pajamas, I don't know. Like, just wordplay stuff. It's like he does about 20 of these in every scene, and so naturally, like a few of them land. A few of them are quite good. But it's, you got to sit through a lot of them to get to the good ones, I feel like. I hope as they keep making movies, they refine this stuff. And by the time we get to Duck Soup, it's like their hit rate is a little higher.
Right.
This movie again has like a totally random not random, but it's like a scene where it's just like, now Harpo plays the harp for like 4 minutes.
Yeah, when that happened, I was like, okay, good, I can stop paying attention for a little while.
It's like, oh, okay, I can microwave my soup or whatever. Yeah, I think this movie has pretty much all of the same problems as the Coconuts.
Yeah. The audio's a little bit better.
A little bit, but it's still, even that kind of reminded me of the bit in Singing in the Rain with the pearls. There's nothing quite that bad.
Yeah.
But if just things that don't sound well, or sort of unrefined on-set sound that is,
I think,
drowned out by some other noises or something.
In general, last year, the sound was kind of universally poorly recorded.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in pretty much all of the movies this year, it has been decent to good sound recording.
I think, just to go backwards a little bit, I think a reason why I think a lot of the sound works in L'Âge d'Or is because I'm pretty sure most, if not all of it, was not sync sound, in terms of like, it's not on-set audio. I don't think they were recording sound while they were shooting. It lets you put the camera in more places and allows the performances to be a little looser, and then allows the actual sound design to also be a bit looser and more expressionistic and whatever. So I think, so many of the problems of these early sound movies are the limitations of trying to record picture and sound simultaneously. And when you don't try to do that, when you just spaghetti western style just record all the audio afterwards, I think it allows for a sort of a freer filmmaking style.
But hey, if you lock everything off on a stagey set, then it shouldn't matter anyway, even though it does in Animal Crackers.
Yeah. Animal Crackers, kind of a musical. I mean, it is a musical. There's like full-on like stage musical numbers in it.
Yeah. Has a bit of a Gilbert and Sullivan vibe to some of it.
Yeah. I'm unfamiliar with Gilbert and Sullivan. Which are their big ones?
The one that Sideshow Bob sings.
Oh, okay. HMS Pinafore?
Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm sure we'll probably get to. Is there a film version of that? Probably.
Probably. Maybe we'll get to the Simpsons episode.
But another movie that has sort of musical performance in it is Morocco, directed by Joseph von Sternberg and starring Marlene Dietrich.
Yes.
Who are both pretty famous at this point, or sort of like the 1930s are like the start of their famous run that they had as director and star.
Yeah, I think Marlene Dietrich was still pretty new at this point.
Yeah. They had done one film for UFA in Germany called The Blue Angel, which was their first collaboration, which I also watched, but you didn't. And I don't know if I have a lot to say about it. I didn't take any notes because I watched it yesterday, just because like I want to see it
here.
No, and it's like that was just me watching too many things.
Well, it also stars Gary Cooper.
Yeah, young Gary Cooper,
famous actor
who was in Wings, but he's like one of the leads in this.
Yeah, he's went on to make a lot of really big stuff. Got some Best Actor wins and all that. But yeah, this is a movie that is kind of just concerning a lot of. It's a love triangle, of course, because everything is
classic old movie plot.
I cannot get over the fact how every single movie is a love triangle.
Yeah.
It has a lot more maybe kind of silent longing than a lot of other movies of its ilk. A lot of like people just missing each other in terms of like being on board with the same stuff at the same time, and then kind of things just getting awkward.
Yeah, it's a better written love triangle than I think we're used to seeing.
Right.
And that I almost feel like there's less of a clear like good choice, bad choice in terms of like the love triangle. You know,
right.
it's like There's Marlene Dietrich is a cabaret singer in Morocco, and there are two men that she has a relationship with. One of whom is Gary Cooper, who is a soldier in the French Foreign Legion. He's got big Rick O'Connell from The Mummy vibes, which, like, I wouldn't be surprised if this movie is like where that element of that character comes from.
Huh.
And he's the sort of like rough and tumble, more kind of traditionally masculine, physical presence sort of character. And then there is what's the other guy's name?
La Bessière.
La Bessière, who is a much more of a sort of like wealthy, tuxedo wearing, fancy pants sort of man with his waxed mustache and his nice cocktails and glamorous lifestyle.
He's played by Adolphe Menjou, who was in The Woman of Paris.
Yeah.
Well,
the movie doesn't necessarily judge either of those characters as like one isn't a sort of clear hero or villain. It's sort of like, yeah, Marlene Dietrich's character is sort of like split between these two dudes, but I feel like in a lot of these love triangle movies, there's like one of these guys is clearly a huge asshole, and one of them is a saintly cowboy who like rescues children from the well, you know?
yeah. Who will I pick?
And this is actually like, you know, it makes sense why her character might have second thoughts about being with either one, or like, because all three characters feel flawed and human in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, a sort of a Joseph von Sternberg staple. Is he likes sort of complicated human characters and relationships. There's a lot of things in this movie that I either in sort of vague terms or in like very specific terms I see in more modern stuff. The really obvious one is, so we just watched Babylon for our 1920s Decade in Review episode.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a moment in that movie that is like lifted from this in the most, it is like shot for shot. The blocking is the same. And it's probably the most famous part of this movie. It's when Marlene Dietrich is doing her big song wearing a tuxedo.
Yeah.
Marlene Dietrich looks better in tuxedo than I will ever look in any clothing. Marlene Dietrich is the coolest. Just throwing that out there. If she wasn't dead, I would marry her. But there's the bit in Babylon where Lady Faye, who's the sort of more of an anime Wong archetype, is dressed in tuxedo and does this risque song, and then kisses a woman in the audience who then hides her face because she's embarrassed, which is just a thing that happens in this movie. Like, it is just the blocking of it is like identical. Marlene Dietrich's body language and just general, the way that she acts while she's performing the song or multiple songs in this movie reminded me also of like Jessica Rabbit a little bit, which I realize Jessica Rabbit is a composite of like every 1930s or 40s like singer and or actress.
Yeah.
But there's certainly some Marlene Dietrich in there.
Yeah, it's a good scene. It also, like, I guess notably in the scene, she she's in a tuxedo and she is kind of like playing a male role in a way, and she kisses a woman who's in the audience, and I think that was kind of considered a bit much later on in the Hays Code, but
would not have happened in 1935.
No.
One of several examples of this movie having sort of a bit more risque-ness to it. There's a great line in the beginning of the movie where Gary Cooper sees a woman who holds up her fingers to say, like, come to my apartment tonight at this time. And he holds up his fingers to confirm, and his, like, officer or whatever comes over and says, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing with those fingers? And he says, nothing. Yet.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by that line, too.
Yeah. That's a good example of, like, what pre-code movies are like. It's like, they go a bit harder than what I think what I feel like most people tend to think of in 1930s movies, which are fairly sort of staid and classy. There's this nice chunk of time where they're less not that less classy, but they're just like they're allowed to actually be about things. Movie. It's a very classy movie. There's a lot of tuxedos in it. Yeah, I mean, the plot of this movie I don't think is that interesting. Like, I feel like we've talked about it enough.
Love triangle.
Love triangle. But, like, it's a little bit better than normal, maybe. I don't know. I feel like I could talk about Marlene Dietrich till the cows come home. Just because I think she's very cool and attractive to look at. Not just, like, but it's, like, not her face. It's, like, she has a presence that I feel like is less... Yeah. There's definitely been people in the 20s that had a similar sort of... Right, there's, like, the vamp archetype.
Yeah. She's not a vamp, though.
No. I feel like Marlene Dietrich is a femme fatale, which is an evolution of
bad.
The vamp. No, and I guess not in this. In some of her other movies, maybe a bit more so.
Have you seen, so other than Blue Angel, have you seen any of
I've
her other
seen
movies?
Shanghai Express also, which is from 32, I think. I feel like, yeah, her, like, archetype feels like a much more, like, 1930s archetype than a 1920s one. I feel like most leading ladies in Hollywood movies in the 20s were more, like, I think a good example is Clara Bow. Like, Clara Bow, even when she's being, like, overtly sexual, is sort of she's like cute and bubbly, and she's like, oh, hey, he I don't know. Yeah. There's a bit of,
it's all this, like, Mary Pickford, like kiddiness to
yeah. There's, like, a little bit of infantilization. There's, like, a little bit of just, like, innocence to it of, like, whereas I feel like Marlene Dietrich is showing up and it's like, I'm not innocent. I know what's up. Get out of my way. Like, yeah, that's not necessarily a new thing in terms of there's been characters like that in 1910s movies that we watched. But much like the transition from 1910s, 1920s, like, we talked about how there was, like, a clear shift, like a noticeable shift in the quality of movies and just, like, what types of movies were being made. I think there's less of that from the 20s to the 30s, between 29 and 30. But I still am noticing, I'm picking up things like that. And I think this movie in particular has a lot of it. Mm-hmm. This movie shot outside a lot of the time, which is just feels like a big step up from something like Animal Crackers, which is, like, so stage bound, so sort of locked off in its camera and its visual style, whereas this is, like, by no means doing anything crazy, but, like, the camera moves, they go outside, and so it feels like a much more modern movie.
Yeah, it's eminently watchable.
Yeah, but it's I think a lot of the early sound stuff we watched was like, oh, this is rough, whereas this is like, no, this feels like a movie.
Yeah, I think especially these movies that we're going to talk on the back half of the episode about, they are movies that don't feel so incompetently made sound wise and are actually just, like, good movies.
Yeah, I could just say facts that I learned, but I don't know, that might not be the most interesting conversation.
We'll probably be watching more Dietrich Sternberg movies in the next couple of years, maybe. So
maybe this is one of the more, I mean, this, like, Blue Angel is the first, and it's the only German one. That one feels very German, whereas this feels much more Hollywood. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, they seemed like an interesting two people, and they worked together a lot during this short time period. Joseph von Sternberg was apparently very controlling, like, possibly bordering on abusive, but Marlene Dietrich never had anything bad to say about him, and was like, no, that's how we work. Like, that's what I'm showing up for.
You mean as a director?
Yeah, like, but like with her specifically, like, he would be, like, super, super controlling in terms of, like, trying to craft her performance. And there's even, it's apparently sort of a thing where, like, people don't even know who to credit more for, like, the movie's success, because it's like they're such a sort of, like, close collaboration. They were both married, but both had a semi-romantic relationship during the making of the movies. Marlene Dietrich had a pretty, like, open marriage her whole life, so she had, like, many affairs with men and women just all over the place. I think, like, multiple during the making of this movie. I think Gary Cooper was having an affair with someone else, but then they also might have hooked up during the making of this. Also, it's, you know, reading about the people who made this movie, I'm like, oh, they were all sleeping together all the time. That was just their thing. It was very open. It was very loose.
There's
Great.
another
Good
movie
for
we
them.
talked about recently that was like that,
I
right?
think it was Wings, right?
Oh, yeah, that's
Also
right.
involving Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper was just having a grand old time on all these movie sets. I like the end of this movie. It's just like good filmmaking, right? This movie ends with Amy Jolly.
Amy Jolly.
So Amy Jolly, all her hemming and hawing, eventually Gary Cooper's going off into the desert to fight with the Legion, and he's, disappearing over the horizon, and she finally decides to run after him into the desert. And as she's running, she takes off her heels and like leaves them behind in the sand, which is just, it's very obvious, but it's a nice little kind of visual metaphor for like, oh, she's living behind her old fancy rich person life with the fancy rich man to go live in the desert with a soldier who might die at any point. And it's like the last shot is like her disappearing over the horizon, and then the Paramount logo fades up over the sound of just like the howling wind, which is like, I don't know, another nice use of like sound design. It's not doing anything that crazy with it, but it's like using sound in a way that isn't just, here is a thing happening, what sound would it make?
Right. And I feel like this would normally be like a kind of swelling music over the end.
Yeah, no. It's a kind of a dour note to end on, because it's like she's running after the man that she's presumably in love with, which is like a very romantic way to end a movie, but it feels like almost The Graduate, like, where it's this thing of like, is this a happy ending? I can't tell. Like, there's an element of just kind of the ominousness to it that is like, this might not work out still. Which,
I mean, they
kind of
haven't,
appreciate about it.
That's the thing, is through the whole movie, they haven't really had like a fantastic back and forth,
No. It's like they're both kind of like wounded people running from a dark past, which in both cases is unspecified. So it's like you get that they have a kind of, they can relate to each other in a way that they can't relate to other people. But it's still like, it doesn't necessarily feel like they have like a great happy life after this movie,
Yeah.
A thing that I thought of, so this is also in combination with Shanghai Express, which is a pretty similar movie to this in a lot of ways. Casablanca feels like a sort of post von Sternberg movie with
see that.
Its sort of like central sort of exotic location, in quotes, like, two Europeans, and it's sort of like transient characters who are like either running from something or running to something, or there's doomed romance, there's regret, there's like criminal shadiness going on. Like, this movie feels, in addition to being set in Morocco, feels very Casablanca like. It's a sort of a proto Casablanca.
Play it again, baby.
That famous line from Casablanca, play it again, baby.
Another movie that pushes the limits of the production code, the pre-code acceptability.
Another movie that has a lot of sort of, for the time, risque stuff in it.
Yeah.
Hell's Angels, directed by Howard Hughes. That old crazy man, Howard Hughes, made a movie that he paid for with his drill bit money that his parents gave him when they died.
Show me all the blueprints.
Show me all the blueprints. He had not made blueprints yet by this point. I had seen this movie before because I saw the Martin Scorsese movie, The Aviator, when it came out, and I was like, I want to see that movie that they're making in it. And so I saw this movie when I was like 15, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Had you seen this before?
No, I have not.
I think I remember not loving it, but just thinking like, this is an interesting artifact of its time. And I think that more or less holds true rewatching it. I don't necessarily think this movie is great. There's good stuff in it, but ultimately it has such a, like, I don't want to say nihilism, but like a misanthropy to it. Like, it's so the characters are so miserable, and it ends on such a note of just sort of like, everything sucks.
I think, I mean, this movie also, like, the characters are miserable, but they're also like douchebags,
Yeah, right. They're miserable, and they're also just like bad people. Or they're dumb, or some combination of the two.
Right.
So yeah, Howard Hughes had not made movies before this. He was a rich Texan whose family made a fortune in drill bits and then died. And then he had a lot of money, and he decided, I'm going to make an airplane picture because I saw wings, and I think that would be fun to do.
This is a very post-Wings film.
Yeah,
This is
for sure.
This is more or less like, I want to make Wings also.
Like, I do think this movie is significant in like film history, and that it's like one really rich guy self-financed this movie himself. You know?
Yeah.
Like, this was made outside of the studios. Yeah, I think it was released by United Artists, but it was like, he paid for it himself, including holding up production to find clouds that looked like boobs, which is a real thing that he did.
Wait, what?
That's in The Aviator also, but I tried to like find more documentation on it. There's not a lot. I couldn't find a lot, but that doesn't strike me as something that Scorsese would make up. That's too weird of a detail to just throw in there.
That's interesting. It's been a long time since I've seen The Aviator, so I don't remember that, and I don't remember any boob clouds in this movie.
I feel like this movie is also significant in that, so The Jazz Singer came out, I think, like a few weeks before they started shooting, and this movie was intended to be a silent movie originally, but then I think about a year and a half in, Howard Hughes was like, hey, people want sound in their movies. Let's reshoot most of this movie to have sound in it. Which another reason why this movie had a massive budget for the time, I guess. Like, this movie, I think, cost in $1930, it cost about $2.8 million, which it only made back $2.5 million. So adjusted for inflation, that's about $51 million approximately in today's money. Which is
a pretty modest budget now.
Right, that's the I was trying to find like what's a funny example of a movie that costs about $51 million, and it's like, that's the budget of A Man Called Otto, which is not an expensive or like extravagant film at all. It's just like Tom Hanks is old and grumpy. Whereas this was like the most extravagant, expensive movie. It wasn't the most expensive movie ever made when it came out, but it was like kind of built up as this like crazy big budget thing.
There are a couple parts of this movie where I'm like, oh, that's where the money went, you know? But
yeah. All of them involving airplanes.
Yeah. I think most of that, though, was just because they had to shoot it twice.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily scream expensive movie at all moments.
Yeah. I think it's fairly obvious which scenes were reshot. Because even though there's sound throughout the whole thing, there's definitely scenes that are clearly shot silent and then had dialogue edited in afterwards or sound edited in afterwards. The fact that they had to reshoot so much of it led to... So Howard Hughes wasn't going to direct this originally. He was just going to produce it. And then he hired two different directors that both either quit or were fired. And eventually he was like, fine, I'll just direct it myself. And then he directed it up until the switch to sound. And then the sync sound segments were directed by James Whale, who we'll talk about next episode for Frankenstein.
Yep. His
most famous movie. So it's like, this movie is basically co-directed by James Whale, even though he has a weird credit. I think it's like sound scenes are staged by James Whale. I think it's something like what the credit is in the movie.
Huh.
It also led to one of the more famous things about this movie is that it's like not Gina Haller's first movie, but it's like her first big role. And she wasn't originally in it. Originally, Greta Nielsen, who's Norwegian, played that role. But since they were switching to sound, it's like, oh, she has a Norwegian accent. It doesn't make sense for her to play this like upper crust British woman. Never mind the fact that Jean Harlow's from Kansas City. Doesn't sound British at all, but whatever. So this movie, I think, is an interesting example of this like intermediate period where movies are still adjusting to sound. A lot of this movie is effectively silent. There's even intertitles in it.
I mean, I think the intertitles are used in an interesting way, though. Like,
right, because they're used to translate German dialogue.
Yeah.
So they're basically subtitles, but it's taking up the whole screen.
Yeah, they don't know what subtitles are yet.
So two sort of filmmaking terms that I'm sure you're familiar with that I kind of want to bring up because I don't really know. Both are sort of like vague in their origins, which is kind of interesting on its own, right? So like a lot of this movie is shot silent with sound added afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Now when stuff is shot silent, like when stuff is like, we're filming a scene, but we're not going to record sound for it, it's usually marked MOS on the slate.
I don't know that.
MOS, no one really knows what it stands for because there's multiple conflicting origin stories for it.
Like
The one
ADR.
Right. ADR is the next thing that I want to bring up because they clearly ADR'd stuff in this movie. But MOS stands for either motor only shot, meaning they're only using a motor for the camera, not for the sound recording equipment, which is much less interesting than the other origin for it, which is probably made up, which is that some German director in Hollywood, it could have probably been von Stroheim or Fritz Lang or Ernst Lubitsch, we don't know, asked for a scene to be shot mit sound, and the guy, assistant camera, whoever, wrote MOS on the slate kind of as a joke, making fun of the fact that he said mit sound because he was German, and then it stuck. And we still say that now, which I think is a funnier story, naturally. And that's what I choose to believe is the origin of the acronym MOS. But either way, that probably originated around this time period when they were switching to sound and needed to mark which scenes would be shot with recorded audio and which ones wouldn't be. ADR is a similar thing where there's so many conflicting, things that it stands for. Additional dialogue recording, automated dialogue replacement, I think is kind of the most common one, maybe. But it's just the process of recording dialogue after a scene has already been filmed and dubbing it or syncing it after the fact. I've talked way too much about acronyms.
General things about this movie. It's two brothers, one who is a good old boy, British, stiff upper lip, traditional guy who sucks, and another one who is a coward who also sucks.
Yeah, there's the straight-laced dumb one and the cowardly horny one. Those are our two lead characters, Roy and Monty, respectively. And we meet them in Germany before the war. They're living abroad in Germany, having a grand old time drinking beer. And, Monty is philandering and making out with lots of ladies, including the wife of a German count who challenges him to a duel. And Monty, being a coward, just goes back to England immediately and is like, I'm not dueling anybody. Which then Roy decides to...
His brother Roy is like, don't be an ass.
Yeah. So Roy goes in his place to the duel and loses, but lives. They duel with pistols. He gets shot, but is in the arm, so he's fine. Is in the shoulder. This is nothing. Who cares? They both go back to England, and war were declared. Their friend Carl, who's German, gets conscripted to go fight for Germany.
They're all college buddies at Oxford
and
before the war.
Roy, being a good old boy, volunteers for the Royal Flying Corps, and Monty, being a horny coward, sees a sign that says "Enlist in the RFC and get a kiss." And so he immediately just kisses the lady, and they're like, "Well, you're in the Royal Flying Corps now. You got a kiss." And he's like, "What? Me? No."
I didn't actually mean that. That was just a joke, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted a kiss from a lady.
And throughout this sort of opening, right, there's off screen, there's this woman, Helen, who's Roy's been dating. And he's like, "Oh, Monty, you gotta settle down and find yourself a nice gal like Helen." And then we meet Helen, played by Jean Harlow. And she's like the least,
the least traditional kind of person.
Yeah, she's the most flirtatious. What's another? I'm trying to think of a better word than loose because that feels derogatory. This movie is kind of derogatory. This movie is kind of one of the almost thesis ideas of this movie is don't trust women, they'll betray you.
Yeah, true. I mean, I feel like when I initially started watching this movie and realized that both of the main characters are douchebags, I was like, okay, so this is when I was realizing that this was more of a dumb action movie than Wings, right?
Right.
Like, I was like, oh, it's the Michael Bay version of Wings. And I was like, maybe that's not fair to
Right.
Michael Bay. Like, he's always the explosion guy. And I wrote the Roland Emmerich. And then right afterward, the two brothers are just being total douchebags. And I'm like, okay, it's the Michael
No, it's
Bay
Michael Bay.
version of Wings.
Right, well, because Michael Bay has a bit of that, like, nihilistic, like, humanity is awful subtext to a lot of his movies.
But yeah, this is like a bro-y action movie.
It is, yeah. And it's one of the sort of points it seemingly is trying to make is that, like, don't care about women because they will only betray you by sleeping with someone else, which is
Everybody betray me.
It's a very Howard Hughesy stance to take, I feel like. It is wild how the movie never takes any effort to, like, the characters never learn anything besides just like, oh yeah, women are untrustworthy. There's a version of this where I think Roy would still get betrayed by Helen and learn that, like, oh yeah, you can't just, like, idealize people and just project everything you want someone to be onto a person.
There's
That's
also another version of
what he's
this
doing.
where Monty gets over his cowardice and becomes a hero.
Right. Like, that's kind of where you'd expect it to go, is Monty sort of, like, learns not to treat women as disposable objects and actually, like, gets his heart broken or sort of learns to care about somebody. And also overcomes his cowardice, which is established early on. But this movie is a very no one learns anything movie. And, like, the people they are in the opening scene are the people that they are at the end of the movie, which is bad, shitty people.
So they join the Air Force. It has a bit of a kind of training sequence a la Wings, but it really just kind of, like, jumps right into them being airplane guys really quick. If this is a Bay movie, like, Wings is more of a Spielberg movie.
Right.
And then, yeah, this did not... I watched this after I watched All Quiet on the Western Front. And...
Big difference.
Yeah, All Quiet, we'll talk about it in a second, but All Quiet on the Western Front is a movie that's just all about the abject horror of war and just how traumatizing and horrific it is. And this movie is like, let's go kill some baddies.
Yeah. It's very...
It's pulpy, this movie.
It's very pulpy, for sure. And I think when it gets into the flying scenes, you can really see where Howard Hughes's heart was at in terms of why he wanted to make this movie, which is he just wanted to film airplanes flying around. Let's be honest. That's his whole deal.
He just wanted to kill a couple stunt guys.
Yeah, I think 3 stunt pilots died making this movie.
Yeah, though the way, I mean, I think only one of them can be blamed on the production of the movie itself, and the other 2 were just like, they were doing a normal thing and then died.
Yeah. I mean, there's a story I saw multiple places where there was a stunt that one of the sort of lead stunt pilots refused to do. He was like, this is way too dangerous. And Howard Hughes was like, I'll do it myself. And so he got in the plane and he did it. And he crashed and fractured his skull. But I guess they got the shot.
The in-air stunt work, I also thought was maybe even better done in Wings, though. I think, like, this movie has a scene with, like, a million airplanes all, like, crisscrossing each other at once, which is cool. But I think that just, like, the editing and composition in the aerial scenes in Wings is better.
I think the flying scenes in this occasionally feel a little bit more kind of immediate, or a little bit more, like, there's a sense of danger to them, probably because they are incredibly dangerous, what is being filmed, and how they're being filmed.
The sound probably helps, too.
Yeah, there's a couple times where, like, there's a camera mounted, like, in the cockpit almost, looking at the pilot's face, and you can see the background behind them, like, just going crazy as they're, like, doing loops or whatever, and it puts you in the cockpit of a plane, I think, pretty well. Wings also did this, but I think this movie is even a little bit more kind of intense in its flying scenes, maybe.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I mean, really good parts of the dogfight, like the big dogfight toward the end of the movie, where it'll just zoom into individual Kaiser soldiers who are dying. And so they all die in, like, a kind of, like, unique way. Like, one guy, like, gets shot and then blood comes out of his mouth. But, like, the way that each of those shots kind of ends is the person collapsing and then the plane losing control and the skyline just spiraling out behind them, which is really cool.
Which you can see because of all the clouds in the background.
Yes.
So there's you've seen The Aviator, right? You know there's a whole
don't remember anything about
there's
The
like
Aviator.
10 whole minutes in The Aviator where Howard Hughes is like shutting down production because he can't find clouds, because it's like the airplanes look fake because there's nothing behind them to show relative motion. And then he asked Ian Holm, the meteorologist, to find him clouds that look like giant breasts full of milk. And he's like, I'll try, but that can't be guaranteed on any occasion. But eventually he finds his clouds and they film the whole thing, and it's great. But so watching this movie, I was just like, hey, there are those clouds. You know, it does help give a sense of like speed and sort of to ground where the planes are relative to each other. This movie has one scene that is shot in color.
Yes.
It was shot in multicolor, which is not Technicolor. It was a different process, but I think it was printed by Technicolor because they were the only ones that had the means
scale.
Yeah. And it looks pretty good for a 2-color Technicolor thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely you can get ahead with 2-strip Technicolor.
Yeah.
It's just that some things look abnormally red or green, but at least white skin tones look pretty good. It had me kind of wondering like how other skin tones would look with 2-strip Technicolor, because it seems like it was probably designed more to accommodate white skin tones. But it's like a big party scene, kind of where you're initially finding out that Helen is a bit more of
a bit more of a party animal. Yeah. So the Helen character I find kind of fascinating, just because of the movie seems to kind of hate her, but at the same time want you to kind of ogle her. It's very this movie strikes me as just a sexist movie in terms of Helen sort of seems to represent women in general, because I think the only other women that we ever see are like French prostitutes.
Yes. Yeah.
And
or at
Helen
least like
is
brainless people who are just like fawning over the military guys. Yeah.
And it's like, so Roy is sort of like hyping up Helen to Monty as this like good girl that he's found. It's like, oh, she's so, pure and behaves herself so well. And then we're introduced to her like running out from behind a bush, clearly having made out with a different soldier who's just like runs off in a different direction. And they're both just like hastily adjusting their clothing and like wiping their face. And then upon meeting Monty, Helen is immediately just like making eyes at him the whole time. And at the party, she's like, hey, why don't you drive me home? And he's like, oh, I guess so. And they get home and like they just immediately sleep together upon leaving the party. And then Monty is then also immediately like, how dare you cheat on my brother, you harlot? And it's like, dude, it was with you doofus. Crazy. And that's what I mean. Like, this movie's like moral stance seems very confused. And
I mean, even about the war too, right? Like it is kind of, there are some parts that acknowledge that, like, Monty is talking about it being, when he's thinking of defecting, about it being a politician's war, and like, what do I need to die for all of this just political alliances and all this kind of thing, which is not untrue about World War I. It really is just like, like there isn't much of a reason for it happening. But and then there's a scene toward the beginning before Monty signs up, gets duped into signing up by a siren, there's
by a siren with a sign saying, if you sign up, we will kiss you.
Yeah.
and he's just like, well, I guess I have to sign up now.
He's like, hubba hubba boyoyoing.
Yeah.
But
he read the sign, but he only saw the word kiss. He didn't see the enlist part.
Oh yeah, it's like the Simpsons bit where Bart's running for class president and he makes a sign that says sex. Now that I have your attention, vote for Bart.
Yeah.
But
that's how they got people in World War I.
Anyway, before that, toward the beginning of the movie, there's a scene of a communist or anarchist who
Yeah,
or just
I think it's
or just
anarchist, right?
or just like a pacifist. Like someone in the audience calls him an anarchist, but like he is at least some kind of pacifist where he is saying all this misery in the world has been caused by and for capitalism. Why should we participate in this war? For capitalism? You will die for capitalism. Your sons will die for capitalism. Down with capitalism. Down with war. And then this guy like snidely in the corner goes, down with the anarchist. And then the whole crowd just jumps on him and beats him up. But like, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
And in certain ways, neither is Monty toward the end of the movie. But then also the movie like clearly judges him for
being a coward, which he is.
Yeah, for not wanting to participate in his like national duty, and it thinks that the war is a good thing, and it does some like, by this point we already had D.W. Griffith making a movie apologizing to the Germans about how he portrayed them during World War One, and this movie just has some cartoonish mustache twirling Germans.
Oh yeah,
in
yeah.
it,
which I mean, probably at the time was a bit more of just like, I don't know, a bit more propagandistic. But like looking back on it, I don't know, it's just like a bunch of World War One Germans with monocles and big mustaches who are like, piloting zeppelins and challenging people to duels, and it's, I don't know, I think it's fun.
It's fun certainly. I mean, I don't think it's like necessarily offensive to make fun of Germans in that way, although it was like, between World War One and World War Two, when they were like, okay, we're not actually mad at Germans right now.
Yeah.
They are just like, cartoonish villains. And I do want to talk about also the Zeppelin scene.
We got to talk about the Zeppelin scene. It's true.
Which I imagine they shot it with a real Zeppelin, or at least if it was a scale model, it was like a very, very big one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a scale model.
But
I don't know for sure.
There were some really great shots when the Zeppelin was being introduced.
Yeah.
Of it like bursting through the clouds.
Yeah.
You just see the clouds high up in the air, and then just an enormous Zeppelin comes out through them, which is amazing. And then also, the commander of the Zeppelin is very ruthless, cartoonishly ruthless. It turns out that their friend Carl is in that Zeppelin, and they are on a mission to drop some bombs on Trafalgar Square in London. And Carl is on this, I wasn't aware of this being a thing, but he's on this like little tadpole looking thing.
Yeah, a little pod that they drop out the bottom.
Yeah, they bring it down on a winch so that he can target the bomb stuff dropping out of the Zeppelin above him.
Yeah, because they're above the clouds and they can't see down to where the bombs are going to fall.
And Carl is conflicted. He has history in London and likes.
It's like a month ago he was living there.
Yeah, and they're like, pick the location to bomb. This whole thing depends on you. And
so he tells them to drop the bombs over a lake.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, direct hit. We blew up all of Trafalgar Square. And the people in the Zeppelin above him are like, great job.
Which is that's a cool scene, I think, because it's like him like acting wise, because it's him kind of having to make this decision to betray his country to do the right thing or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Once the bombs are dropped, and they were going to drop a few bombs, and then the commanders gleefully like, let's just drop some more, like destroy all of London. They drop more bombs into the water, but while Carl is getting pulled back up on the winch, which is going to take like 10 minutes or whatever, Monty and Roy and a number of other people in airplanes have found the Zeppelin and have begun a chase. And to rise high up into the atmosphere where the planes would not easily follow, they need to lose a bunch of ballast weight from the Zeppelin very quickly.
So might as well just cut the line for the guy in the pod.
Yeah.
And then have like half the crew jump out.
Yeah, which is so crazy.
I wonder if there is any like historical precedent for that happening, or if it's just a highly exaggerated example of kind of like the German mindset in World War One of like sacrificing people willy-nilly.
Yeah, they were just like, it was like a whole like zero fighter situation of like, just kill yourself for the greater cause right now. Like jump out of a Zeppelin to your death, please. So yeah, they kill Carl. He falls to his death, and then like about a dozen other people from the ship just salute and then jump out.
Yeah,
which is a pretty crazy scene. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah,
but
doesn't work. Zeppelin still gets blown up.
Yeah, there was a comment on YouTube of some person who was like, "Wow, like the people who jumped out, what good soldiers." And like,
yikes!
I don't know, man. Like, this is a little more complicated than that.
I mean, I guess from a purely like military standpoint, maybe.
It was presumably a jingoistic American who was saying this.
Yeah.
But yes, to bring Roland Emmerich back into it, the Zeppelin finally goes down.
I see where this is going.
There is a what they've shot down most of the planes, including Roy and Monty's. They're okay, but they kind of crash landed on the ground, and all the other planes have been shot down in various ways, except for one whose gun was jammed the entire time. And he's like,
"Doesn't anybody have any missiles left?"
And so he's like, "What do I do? We've got to get the Zeppelin." And so he's just like, more suicide bombing. He just flies his plane straight into the Zeppelin and blows it up.
Yeah.
And it's cool as fuck.
I mean, yeah, it's a plane flying into a Zeppelin. The Zeppelin blown up in a big fireball. It rules.
There is, you're seeing part of this scene from the ground where Roy and Monty are like walking out of their plane, and then they see the Zeppelin blow up and they're like, "Hell yeah, you did it." And then the Zeppelin starts falling right toward them, and they just book it like away from the Zeppelin. And then there is an amazing shot, like really wide shot of the two of them running away, and then just this enormous on fire Zeppelin crashing to the ground in front of them.
Yeah.
And
behind
like
them.
Oh yeah, behind them.
Yeah.
And like I just audibly went, "Holy shit."
It's also, I mean, during World War One, I'm sure that phenomenon was observed. I'm sure people saw Zeppelins getting blown up and shot down. And so like people knew what it looked like. But it's crazy just how close that footage looks to the Hindenburg disaster.
Yeah.
Right. It's a work of effects and miniature and bigature and whatever, however they did it. But it's like, it's pretty wild how accurate it is just to like, yeah, everyone now knows exactly what this looks like, and they nailed it.
Yeah, they had like the flaming skeleton of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it looked really amazing. And there was an intermission in the movie, and it was right after that scene.
Yeah.
And it
well
felt
placed.
Yeah, it felt really good because like it allowed people to go out into the lobby and talk about how cool what they just saw
Holy
was.
shit, that Zeppelin scene was amazing.
Which is exactly what I did during the intermission. I just walked out and it was like, oh my god, that scene. It was so cool.
Yeah. I'm sure that's what everyone did when this movie premiered. This movie's premiere was a big deal. I guess we could talk about that too. Or should we talk about the end of the movie first?
Sure.
So the movie ends with, right, the brothers get shot down. They're involved in this like spy mission, right, where they use a stolen German bomber to bomb this munitions factory. And then they're escaping, and we get the big sort of third act dogfight scene. And they're eventually shot down and captured, and because they were in a stolen German plane, they're technically spies. And they get brought to the Baron from the beginning of the movie, who was behind the whole duel thing. Roy sort of convinces him, the Baron, to give him a gun with one bullet in it. He's like, "Hey, like, I hate this other guy that I'm with, and like, I'll tell you what you want to know, but he needs to die." I don't really know what Roy's actual plan is here. He's like, "Okay, I have a gun now with one bullet."
He fulfilled his plan. Like maybe he wanted to Like when he wanted all the bullets because he wanted to see if he could stage an escape. But like the reason why he wanted the gun with one bullet and he did this whole stunt was because Monty was about to tell them everything and about an invasion plan, and would have like sentenced hundreds of people to their deaths so that he could get away. And Monty was like, or Roy was like, "Let me handle it," and then he kind of posed as if he was going to do that instead of Monty.
Mhm.
But he realized that he couldn't trust Monty to not like spill the beans, so he just shot his brother.
Yeah, in the back.
Yeah.
And then Roy is then, because he was captured as a spy and refuses to give up any information, is then shot by a fragment squad, and that's the end of the movie. A
Yeah.
brother murders his other brother and then is killed, which is, yeah, just very much in line with the whole, like, just the nihilism I get from this movie of just like,
Mhm.
yep, bad stuff. Like, Monty is introduced as a coward and he dies as one, kind of, and Roy is sort of like, I guess throughout the movie kind of held up as this like, you know, more moral or more upstanding of the two, but he still is like at best naive, at worst like completely incapable of reading people, and just very, very selfish in his own way.
Yeah. Self-destructively traditional in certain
Yeah.
ways.
I don't love this movie. It's I think it has I think it has a lot of cool things about it. I think like the early like two-strip Technicolor stuff is cool.
Yeah.
You know, the airplane stuff is, the Zeppelin bit is great, you know, and I think that comes across too with, you can tell what Howard Hughes cared about the most. He's like, this Zeppelin scene is gonna rule. And then when it comes to like actual like character scenes, he's like, who cares?
Yeah.
It feels a lot less kind of, feels
Make
more
it vaguely
half-baked.
wingsy.
Yeah. This movie had a big premiere at the Chinese Theater in LA, and everybody who was everybody showed up. Buster Keaton was there, Cecil B. DeMille was there, Gloria Swanson, Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, all the who's who of Hollywood. There's footage of it. There's like newsreel footage on YouTube, which is kind of funny, which is then copied very accurately in the movie The Aviator also. Speaking of World War I pictures,
Yeah.
let's get to our final film of the episode, All Quiet on the Western Front.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
The Academy Award winner for 1930
Yeah.
for Best Picture, or Outstanding Production, I believe as it was called back then.
And you know, spoilers for the upcoming favorites section, but I agree that this is the best picture of 1930.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I liked. I don't know if we're getting into favorites immediately. It's either this or Borderline for me. I think this probably overall is a more successful movie.
This movie was very affecting for me.
Yeah.
I was bowled over by this. This is an I've rarely seen war movies that are this unambiguously anti-war, because
Yeah.
you know, the thing that I always say, which I believe, or I bring up a lot, which I think is a reference or something that Truffaut said about it being impossible to make an anti-war movie because there's something that's glorifying about putting something on a movie screen.
Yeah.
And I think that this has done one of the best jobs that I've seen of a war movie just feeling awful. Like there's nothing to be proud of here. Like, this just sucks. Like, this is bad.
And it's like, it doesn't even, I like how much it doesn't necessarily just hit you over the head with it. Like I think the Netflix adaptation, the German adaptation of this novel that came out last year, it, you know, goes way harder with how violent it is in terms of like seeing just people being like torn apart by artillery and bayonets. And it's like, it's really, really, it's one of the most like violent movies I've probably ever seen.
Wow.
But I like how much this movie's pretty violent for when it was made, but I like how much of it is, naturally there's that element of war that sucks and is terrible and is completely dehumanizing, but there's also just like how much World War I was just sitting in a trench, not having food, and like, just the slow progression of like having your own humanity like stripped from you is I think the thing this movie gets. And I think I haven't read the novel, but I think having seen now 2 different movie adaptations of it, like that is sort of the main idea that is being put forth, is sort of like the cumulative effect of how it just like hollows people out.
Yeah. Like that scene in the trench where they're starving for, a week or something like that. It's rough. Like there are all these people who, they're being shelled constantly, so they can't leave their hole that they're in, and they can't sleep because of all of the noise. They start eating sawdust and stuff.
They're also children, right? They're all like 17.
Yeah.
So it's like just that, in addition, as a thing that I think about with older wars, right, is like how young the people were who usually fought in them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tons of stories in World War One about people who lied about their age, who were like 14, who went to go fight in World War One. I'm like, you put a 14-year-old in a trench?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And there's a scene later in the movie. They were kind of seniors in high school or whatever the German equivalent of this was. But then there's a scene where it's a few years later, and the main character is kind of back at the kind of training area, and he's seeing the like even younger people.
Who he goes back to his old school.
Yeah, he goes back to but he goes back to the base camp, and then he sees like all of these even younger teens who have just been like sent out on one mission, and 80% of them died. And he's like, what are we even doing, And there's another scene where he is home on leave because he got injured, and the movie begins with his teacher in school basically telling him and his classmates that it's noble to die for your country. You guys have a great opportunity here. Like, this is so good and so right for you to do, and it's so you're heroes for doing it. And then he comes home and sees after having his entire base of friends and classmates be maimed or killed, he goes back home and sees that teacher doing the same thing to some more students who and it horrifies him, and he says, like, he tells them, like, there's nothing good about this, like, this is like about being a soldier, it's horrible, it's bad, like it's pain and death. And then the students are so bought in that they call him a coward and try and kick him out of the classroom.
It did remind me of things I was reading about Caligari, and how that movie is like a response to the German experience of World War One, and how there was like people who fought in World War One came back and were like, we were lied to, like we were children who looked up to authority, and they told us all this stuff about the glory of war and that it would be an adventure and all this stuff. And they were just like, no, sir, incorrect. How dare you? Like, we are betrayed and no longer trust authority as a concept anymore. Which is fair. And I think this movie gets at that feeling pretty well. Even if it's an American film, I don't think that there was quite that level of like disillusionment after World War One in the United States. I mean, it was certainly a much more distant thing for the U.S. because it was never on, whatever conflict happened in the U.S. was like naval, right? It was like submarines blowing up ships and such. Like, there was never, Germany never invaded Florida.
Yeah.
Whereas I think certainly in like England and other parts of Europe and Germany, it's like, it's a much more kind of palpable wound in their like cultural identity. And this is I think this movie is often held up as like one of the only examples of like, if an anti-war film is possible, right? Because of the Truffaut sort of paradox, right? Of like,
Yeah.
is it possible to be truly anti-war when like film inherently kind of glorifies whatever you're filming? Yeah, it's like this is. I think the power of the written material, like again, having not read the novel, but it's like the writing of it is so strong that I think
Yeah.
it really imparts a real disillusionment with the entire idea of war.
There's a similar scene in this movie as in Hell's Angels, where the characters are talking about the futility and like pointlessness of the war. And there it's like this kind of thing to make fun of, but in here it's like it's coming from a genuine place, and it makes you believe it. It makes you like you've witnessed these children be traumatized horrifically by everything going on around them, and they're like, why are we actually even doing this, and it is a genuine question in the movie. I like you were saying, I think that like this being an American production is kind of interesting because like, it's an American production in English, but based on a German book about Germans. And
it opens with the first lines of the novel. Like it's got a little title card at the beginning that's like the first paragraph in English from the book.
Like, because it's not about Americans, I think it kind of sidesteps some of the issues that might arise if this movie were about Americans, which would be like this kind of tie to your own nation, I think that like if you're making a war movie about your own nation's military, then there's this like reflexive support that you feel. Where this movie, I think, at least for American audiences, like allows you to be a little more dispassionate about what's going on because it is about Americans playing Germans and presumably Americans playing French people. So you can look at just the general idea of what it's trying to say. Isolated from national feelings.
Yeah. I would like to read the book. Having now seen 2 movies of it, it does seem like... And it's always kind of interesting just to compare the two. I don't think we need to get into that very heavily, because I don't think you've seen the German one, right?
I have not, no.
But it's, a lot of the same... They have kind of the same big scenes, right? The big kind of turning point scenes are all the same. Or very similar. Like, there's... Maybe my favorite scene in both movies is when... Paul, the lead character, is stuck in a crater with a French soldier that he's just stabbed, but he's still alive. And they don't speak the same language, and they're both just hiding in there, and the French guy is slowly dying over the course of hours or days. And Paul goes from, immediately stabbing this guy to try to kill him to talking with him and trying to almost sort of like keep him alive. And then he finally dies, and it's like you see like Paul's brain breaking throughout this whole
because
scene.
There are parts where like his military training is kicking in, and he like starts acting more aggressively toward the guy. And then he just pulls himself back. He's like, "Oh no, you're my brother. I'm so sorry."
Yeah, and he's like giving him water, and he's like trying to keep him alive, and he's like, "I'm so sorry for what I did. Like I was afraid. I thought you were my enemy." And then he finally dies, and it's almost like he gets angry with him again for dying. It's it's a very
really
a very
good.
intense, powerful scene that I think, if I have one criticism of this movie, it's that I think the lead actor who plays Paul, Lou Ayres, his acting style is very 1930s, I guess. Like it's very big, and there's moments that don't feel as maybe truthful as I wish they did for this movie.
I think he does a good job in a lot of parts, but there are definitely some things that are done a little too big, and this was an early role for him too.
But that being like, I think for when this movie was made and when it came out, I think he is well cast and is still, I mean, it's one of these pitfalls of being like an early talkie. People didn't really know quite how to act on film in many ways.
I will say that
it was like less naturalistic than we're used to seeing now, but It is, I think, for the time, it is a good performance. I don't want to badmouth it.
The soldier, the French soldier who was dying in that pit, is named Raymond Griffith, and he was a comedian in a bunch of silent movies.
Whoa.
But he is someone who, this was his last movie he ever made, not because he died, but because he was able to be a silent film star because he lost his voice when he was a kid. And so he
Whoa.
played a character who could
doesn't
not
speak.
speak. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Damn.
And also speaking to this as a sound movie, I thought the sound design in it was incredible.
Every aspect of the direction of this movie, I think, is pretty incredible. Like, this is easily the best directed sound film that we've watched.
Yeah, I mean, this is like verging on the best movie that we've seen so far to me.
I wouldn't hold it up that highly, but I can see why.
It's definitely up there.
Yeah, that's more of a matter of personal preference than anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very well made movie.
But yeah, the sound design in this, like the just explosions in the background, when they're stuck in the trench, like the dust falling down from the ceiling, and just like this kind of, yeah, like in the out and out battle scenes, like the kind of extreme gunshots and explosions noises, I think it all sounds really, really good. And notable also is that this movie doesn't have a score, which is pretty common in early sound movies. It's funny that the Broadway Melody actually had some non-diegetic music, but now that there's like a lot of stuff that, like, now that sound is getting more established, it feels like non-diegetic score music is becoming less, like, it's not much of a thing.
Did Morocco have a score? That had plenty of music, and I don't think it ever had score. Yeah, Hell's Angels did, but I don't think Morocco does.
Yeah, this movie has no score, and in fact, like, I think a score was added later, and the director, Louis Milestone, was vehemently against it and campaigned for its removal, which it eventually was.
It is almost, I think this movie is a good example of, with the introduction of sound, silence takes on additional weight, because like the choice not to have sound is then much more deliberate. And so I think the parts of this movie where they pull the sound out are actually, like, you really feel the silence of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of like off-screen dialogue and off-screen sound effects, which are things like, this is a movie where if you took the sound out, it would really feel like it was missing something. Yeah.
And there is a silent version of this movie. This was a process that a lot of movies went through in this early sound era, where they made a kind of Sunrise style version that is silent with intertitles, but then has sound effects and music. And that was and it was also edited slightly differently, the silent version of this. So that's also, there is a silent version.
I don't know, I feel like we've kind of, like, do we want to talk about the plot anymore? Like,
I guess we don't need to.
They go to war. Everyone dies.
They go to war, and they string from, like, terrible thing to terrible thing. Some are, like, terrible in a life-threatening way, and some are terrible in, like, a sort of interpersonal way. And then occasionally there's some levity, just to give you contrast.
I do actually think the levity in this movie is, like, incredibly important to have, like, those few moments of lightness in them, because even those kind of feel like really mundane in a way, where it's like they find a poster of a woman and they're like, oh my god, look at this lady. Just seeing a poster of a woman, they're just like, oh, what a life we could be living right now. Or, you know, they get
traumatized teens.
They get double the amount of beans that they would get, and they're like, it is the best thing that has ever happened. They're like, we have 2 bowls of beans today. And it's, just to see how kind of the smallest amount of kind of comfort that they can find is, like, incredibly important to these people, because they're children who have been asked to, you know, sit in a trench and kill people for years on end.
I think like another kind of source of a lot of the levity in this movie is the character Kat, who
Love Kat.
is
Great guy.
he's like kind of their commanding officer, but he's not like a tyrant like the first one that they had.
The mailman.
Yeah. uh he is like someone who gets it, basically. He's like, yeah, like this is bad and there's nothing good about it, and we're just making the best of a good of a situation.
He's very jaded, but at the same time he's not a stickler for rules. He's just like, we are just trying to survive. Like, that's the best we can do. If we have to steal food, if we have to, do whatever we gotta do, that's fine. And yeah, he's a source of levity and also of kind of like perspective, right? He's a little bit older than the rest of the characters. And but yeah, then he is killed unceremoniously from a leg wound that he just bleeds out from.
I think he might have gotten like nicked in the back of the neck or something again during that scene.
Right. It's sort of unclear whether or not it's the leg wound killed him or if he was more gravely injured than he let on. It's not like a big death scene, right? It's just like he gets hurt and then they bring him back to camp. It's like, oh, he's dead. He died.
Yeah.
On the way back.
Which it feeds into like what the movie is doing, which is like there's nothing heroic about these deaths and it's just random and horrible.
Yeah. He wasn't fighting in a battle even. They were just out like for a walk and a bomb landed on them. And that's kind of like I feel like the kind of like last amount of Paul's humanity kind of leaves when he finds that Kat has died. Like, he's the last friend that he has. And it's
because they've all died. Yeah.
Right. And then he is this kind of just like he's lost all will to even survive at that point. And so then it's like the end of the movie, which is great, is he sees a butterfly and it's like this one tiny symbol of like hope or beauty in the world, and it's like he reaches out to get the butterfly and he gets shot.
Yeah.
The meaning behind that imagery is
it's poignant.
It's very easy to understand, but it is very poignant and good. Good movie.
Kat, he's played by Louis Wollheim, who was normally cast as like bruisers and villains in movies.
Yeah, sort of a Wallace Beery type.
He's got a kind of chunky face that with
one of them chunky
previously
faced,
broken nose.
Chunky face 1930s actors. He looks like he could be a boxer or a wrestler or something.
And so he's kind of playing against type here as like a softie, and he does a really good job at it. Louis Milestone, the director, had previously cast him against type in a comedy movie that he made the previous year. One other kind of note is that like we touched on that scene where Paul goes back and sees the class, but he's on leave for like 6 days and he leaves after 1 day because he's realized that the war has changed him so much that he can't relate to anybody anymore.
Yeah.
And then also he's just disgusted at the way that the powers that be or the kind of older men who aren't fighting in the war are treating it like a game.
Yeah, they're sort of backseat generals who are like looking at maps and like, oh, what they should have done is this.
And he's like, this is terrible. Like,
yeah. That scene, no war happening, but it's like that scene is one of the most sort of like powerful scenes of like what war does to people. Like they come back and they don't know how to function anymore because they've been conditioned just to live in these very specific terrible circumstances, which is still a problem with veterans coming back from war. So, and
along with the lines of this being like a pre-code movie,
got gore in it.
We mentioned, there's some pretty shocking gore at some points. In particular, there's a part where there's a French soldier who's running toward some razor wire to try and go through it, and then a bomb blows up right next to him, and then there are just disembodied hands on the razor wire as the rest of him has been exploded. Yeah. And you're like, oh my God,
Amazing shot. Just such a straightforward visual that is like, it really, like the brutality of it, but also just like the weirdness of it is like really sticks in the brain, I think.
But yeah, I guess we forgot to mention during talking about Hell's Angels that also there's some cussing in it too.
True. Yeah.
Where pretty extreme for the time. There are two. There's a goddamn it and two son of a bitches in that movie, which
Ooh. Which is
two
like,
sons of bitch.
I don't think I even clocked that when I was watching it. I did also read about that, but it's so tame by today's standards that I didn't even think about it. But it is something that would never have happened in a Hays Code era film.
Yeah.
A post 1934 movie would absolutely not say son of a bitch. Or if they did, it would be like a huge deal.
Right. But yeah, this one is more pushing it with the violence, I would say.
Which I think we even talked about. Like, the battle scenes in this movie are super intense.
Yeah.
And I think are less I think the battle scenes in Wings are like really impressive for their scale.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this are, I think the scale is also there. It's like they're staged very well, and it's clearly huge, lots of extras, everything's blowing up. But I think it kind of puts you in a bit more of a subjective point of view than Wings. Wings was all about kind of like this big, picture of like these massive battle scenes and planes flying overhead, and this is much more like looking out through a tiny hole in a wall and seeing all this stuff. It's like it feels very sort of from the perspective of the soldiers. And there were a couple shots in this of like mortars landing or like things blowing up that were just still insane to see because they're just doing it for real. I don't know if they're using actual artillery or not, but it's like, there's some kind of jaw dropping stuff, and it's well directed too. Like, there's lots of great like cameras on a track a lot of the time, just like tracking through stuff. A lot of really good camera movement, great sound design and that stuff.
Yeah, there's some good parts where they're able to do some more freeform movement with the camera by having sort of pre-recorded sound over it.
Yeah.
So there's like dialogue over camera moving, but it's dialogue that was recorded and then placed on top of it. So that you could do much more dynamic stuff, which I thought was a really good way of getting around the issues that they had.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's a great sort of, this is maybe the first movie that we've watched that feels like it is kind of properly using both methods of like recording stuff while the camera's running, but then also pre-recording stuff or recording stuff after to allow for a freer use of the camera. Good movie.
Good movie.
This movie was banned in Germany, amongst other places. Not right away, but in Germany, this movie was attacked by Nazis who would straight up like attack screenings. Like, they would show up and they would throw stink bombs and like, beat people up who tried to get into the theater, and like
they released rats into the theaters.
Yeah. And it got, I guess, maybe because of that pressure, maybe there was some other political pressure, but this movie was banned before the Nazis took power in 1933. It was definitely banned after that. And the book was also banned and was one of the first to be publicly burned. Other countries banned the movie. I mean, it's very obvious why Nazis hated this movie. It's because it is the least nationalistic thing that is extremely anti-war and is like, hey, old German men leading people to war, bad, don't do it.
Right.
But other countries banned this purely on the stance that it was seen as pacifist propaganda, which is wild.
Yeah.
It's wild to be like, this movie is too anti-war. Like, we got to have some more pro-war stuff out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, people have been killed over that, so.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of a movie being banned for that reason, but it happened.
Yeah.
The book was also banned for similar reasons. Sometimes up until like the 50s or through the 70s. Like, it was banned for a while. The author of this book, Erich Maria Remarque, speaking of Marlene Dietrich and her many affairs, they had an affair later on in the 1930s, so good for them.
The director, Lou Milestone, kind of went on to make a lot more Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
Including Mutiny on the Bounty and Ocean's 11, the original Ocean's 11.
Quite a filmography.
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie it's definitely sort of in the pantheon of like the great Hollywood movies, and I think it is deservedly so.
I think it's like the first great sound movie.
Yeah, probably. I don't like. Maybe it's just the fact that I'd seen it before, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't have a super strong like emotional reaction to this movie. I really admire how well made it is, but I don't feel like I saw it and was like, oh, my heart, you know. Which is
I guess I didn't remember enough from the last time that I saw it that
maybe
it hit
I'm
me as if it was the first time.
Maybe I'm just so hollowed out from having seen too many war movies. I don't know.
And yeah, if we're to move into favorites, it's my favorite. What do you think?
I'm gonna say Borderline just to be contrarian and to have a different, because I think my enjoyment of both was about the same, and I mean, I saw Borderline under very good circumstances and being able to see an actual projection of it and that sort of thing. I think Borderline is less concerned with sort of like telling a narrative than I think All Quiet is. But it's, I don't know, I appreciated just the fact that it's like trying a bunch of stuff that I think we're in an era now where movies are starting to really kind of fall into a rut of sameness of like, okay, we know how to do this now. Like stuff kind of looks the same, and it's, you know, there's, you can still kind of feel some of the weight that having to record sound put on production, even if already it's, you know, the movies this year were so much better than the ones from 28 or 29. So
yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to. I mean, we got a real doozy of a year next episode. So
yeah.
So perfect episode for spooky season. We're gonna be talking about some Universal monster pictures.
Just in time though. Just in time for Halloween. And yeah, we'll probably be addressing some Universal monsters in October as well, because you know they're out there.
We can talk about the Dark Universe some more.
Yes, the original Dark Universe. Well, with that silly reference, I think that'll be about it for this episode.
Indeed.
Thank you all for watching and listening. Make sure to leave comments and to follow us on stuff. It's all in the description. You know what to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, that'll be about it. And the beginning of the 1930s. Very exciting.
Yeah.
We're in the talkie era.
Who'd have thought we'd make it this far?
Yeah. This is the longest that I've ever stuck to doing anything.
It does feel like with the beginning of the 1930s, it's like, oh yeah, we're entering like a whole new era, kind of. I think we said this last episode also, but it's it feels significant. The stuff that we're watching feels very different from 10 episodes ago, you know?
Yeah. 40 down, and in 40 more, I'll see you for 2001 Space Odyssey or whatever. All right. Well, that's about it. Glenn, I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
Why don't you get in that line? What are you doing with those figures?
Nothing. Yet.
Get in there.